Hello, everybody. I'm Lynn Leatherwood. I'm the president of Story Circle Network, and I am delighted that you're here with us today. We have a wonderful webinar for you with 4 illustrious authors. They are going to be exploring the whole concept of search for sanctuary. And as they have written 4 paths to sanctuary from their 4 very different books. So we'll look forward to getting to know them through this webinar. I'm going to let them introduce themselves as they proceed. And so we're going to take it away. Cindy, you're starting, is that correct?
It would be Anika.
I will be taking
Anika,
Thank
please,
you.
You may begin.
Thank you so much. Welcome, everyone. Liz, could you move us to the next slide? All our viewers and listeners, thank you so much for being here today. We will all take turns in introducing ourselves. I myself am Anika Rana, and my novel is Wild Boar in the Cane Field. But kind of an overview of what we hope to accomplish today, as you read about in about this workshop, is you should be able to discover our distinct voices and unique stories of all 4 of us, based on our memoirs and novels. We've got 3 novels and 1 memoir. And we all share the same overarching theme of the search for sanctuary. As you listen to us, you will also learn a bit about our journey of what inspired us and what was the outcome of our process. And most importantly, we would like to engage you in the conversations and also take you through a small activity. So before we start talking about ourselves, Liz, if you could move us to the next slide, let's begin with this short activity. So I'm hoping all of you have a pencil and paper or your laptops in front of you. And even if you don't, that's all right. You can kind of pull something together. So these are 4 images that we would like you to look at carefully. You've got a lotus flower, you've got a tree, you've got a fly. I'd like you to look at these images and find out which one resonates with you the most regarding sanctuary and why. And we'd like to give you 5 minutes for this activity. And let's put the timer on. It's 4:05. So at 4:10, we're going to call you back. Liz, I don't know if we have music to keep them entertained, but I'll put myself on pause.
Yeah, unfortunately, we do not. So.
Okay, silence is good. Silence is good for sanctuary. So one more minute to finish off your final thought. Okay, so I'm hoping you got inspired by some of these images. You got a chance to reflect and think of your own level of sanctuary. But I'm going to ask you to hold your thoughts and what you have written till after we have talked a bit about how these images have inspired us. And then we'd like to see if your reactions have been similar to ours or different, particularly since every writer takes their own journey. Liz, if you could move us to the next slide. So I'd like to begin with the definition of sanctuary, or the concept of finding sanctuary for ourselves. This is how the four of us decided that we think about sanctuary. We know it is a universal truth, and it is a universal truth that applies to all of us. At some point, we need that peace, we need the space, regardless of time and place. These truths are seen as eternal or absolute, and such truths by which an author connects the reader to their own experience. So we might have brought our own concept of sanctuary, but our readers will take away their perspective, their own journey and their own understanding. And these truths are revealed in the characters' thoughts, feelings, and actions. So the three of us, the four of us, as you know, three of us have written novels and one is a memoir. You will hear from each of us how these elements relate to our writing, and particularly in relation to the books that we have written. And I'm going to pass it on to Cindy, who will talk a bit about the image that resonated with her, and she'll tell you a bit about herself, and we will be lucky to get a reading from her as well to kind of demonstrate how that image resonated with her. So Cindy, and Liz, could you please move it to the next slide?
Yes, hi, my name is Cindy Rossico. I'm the author of Finding Venerable Mother, A Daughter's Spiritual Quest to Thailand. And so on the right, you see the image of Kuan Yin, the goddess of compassion. She has many different she appears in many different aspects of Buddhism. There are different types of Buddhism, and she's always there with a slightly different name. But as the title of my book suggests, I was searching for Venerable Mother. And as we go on, I can explain more about my own search for self-forgiveness of my own mother and acceptance of myself. So it might help to say, why are we so busy talking about universal themes and truths? Well, oftentimes a reader can't necessarily identify with my personal story, but the journey, the overall journey, the universal truth is always there. It's a nugget of, or a kernel of truth that other people can identify with and take away from the writing. So I'll start by saying, my definition of sanctuary, which is sanctuary is that sacred place of belonging that I call home. So my book is a spiritual memoir and describes, surprisingly enough, how I left my suburban lifestyle in Northern California and became ordained in the Thai Buddhist tradition. I had no idea when I moved to Thailand in 2005 with my former husband and teenage son that I would find sanctuary with a Thai Buddhist nun, Venerable Dhammananda Bhikkhuni. So although you see the statue of Kuan Yin here, in a sense, I found my own. Kuan Yin is a female goddess. I found my own goddess and spiritual guide, not goddess, but human guide in Dhammananda, the Thai Buddhist nun. Now, I first heard her speak at a conference in Bangkok soon after we moved there. You know, if you've ever been an expat or heard an expat story, there's often a period of transition in the first 3 to 6 months where you feel very alone and adrift. I had left my family, friends, a part-time job. So all of a sudden, found myself plunked in a new country with a new culture, a new language, and I was feeling very untethered. So I decided to attend a conference in women in developing countries and picked in that conference a workshop called Faith, Feminism, and the Power of Love. Well, lo and behold, that was the first time I encountered Venerable Dhammananda Bhikkhuni, and she spoke up. There was a panelist of about 9 women, and during the course of the panel discussion, there was an altercation between 2 of the women, and it kind of stopped everyone. There was a heaviness in the air and a silence, and into that silence stepped Dhammananda, Venerable Dhammananda, and she said, "We cannot solve anything with anger. Anger doesn't lead us anywhere. It is much harder to practice loving kindness and compassion. That is the goal of Buddhism." Well, I was profoundly moved, not only by what her words said, because talking about anger was something I'd struggled with all my life, and forgiveness, especially with my own mother. And also, I was just profoundly moved by her presence. She's very compassionate, she's very peaceful, and it's a warm, loving energy that you can feel even from a distance. So this indeed, she became like, I got to know Venerable Dhammananda. We spent 3 years in Thailand, and during that time, I formed a very close relationship with her, and she became like a mother to me, and I was like her daughter. And indeed, in Thai, her name is Luang Me, which means Venerable Mother. So in keeping with the title of my book, I had found a mother who could love me unconditionally, love me and nurture me in a way that my own mother never could. Which brings me back to my theme of finding sanctuary. I found that sacred place of belonging within myself. So just to review back to our topic, today we're talking about universal themes. And these are many and several in a book, like Finding Sanctuary, Mother-Daughter Healing. Those are just 2 themes I write about in my book. Now, according to my publisher and editor, actually, in Brooke Warner, in memoir, we call those universal nuggets of truth reflection and takeaway. So reflection answers the question, what sense do you make of your experience as a writer? What's our message to the reader about who we are and how we navigate the world? Takeaway, the other term, is a specific type of reflection. It's at the heart of memoir, and it conveys the human truth, and is often written in the second person. Now, just to clarify, very few people are reading my memoir because they care about me. If you're Michelle Obama or someone famous, that's a different story. But they're buying my book because the topic resonates with them, something about, they want to learn something about themselves. Excuse me for just a second. So in order to give you an example of takeaway, I'm going to read a passage, and it comes at the end, and I want you to listen to it. It's about halfway, in this passage is about halfway through my book. And I'm going through a lot of changes, as you will hear. And before I read, I want to say that Durga was our Nepali housekeeper, Randall was my former husband, and Chris was my son. Back home, the ground underneath me was shifting. I was like a tiny leaf suspended from a branch, fluttering in the wind, hanging on by one thin thread to a former self, who turned more and more to the temple as my spiritual anchor and home. Durga, now proficient in her domestic duties, ran the household with little direction for me except to help with meal planning. Since Randall worked during the week and rode his bicycle on the weekends, we spent less time together. My son required less attention from me as he settled into his school routine. Now that my family didn't depend on me as much, I watched my identity as wife and mother float away like a white slip of paper blowing in the wind. I worried that no one needed me and wrestled with feelings of insecurity. I felt adrift like a stranger in my own skin. It wasn't an unfamiliar feeling to me, but nevertheless, it took me by surprise. And here's some takeaway or reflection. If you've ever passed yourself in the mirror and done a double take at the person staring back at you, you know the experience. I knew it was a combination of things bringing it on, but primarily an old version of me was dying and I didn't know who I was. Now that Durga was taking care of us, my son and my husband no longer needed me in the same way. Whatever person I expected myself to be, whatever role I had played in the family suddenly vanished. Change brings about a profound sense of loss and a longing for parts of ourselves that have gone missing. We search frantically for our identity in the face of uncertainty. Perhaps that's why we embark on the spiritual journey, to uncover who we are in the process of becoming. So that last paragraph is an example of takeaway. And Liz, can you move to the last slide? Next slide, sorry. So this is basically a picture of me with Venerable Dhammananda on the left. And this is me when I had my head shaved and was ordained. And I'm quite happy and joyous, as a matter of fact. You can see how much larger I am than the Thai women. Nevertheless, I'm going through a lot of, I was really elated, I was glowing, and people said I looked like the little Buddha, more confident, self-assured, and grounded when I came back. So you can see in memoir, our essential task is to speak to a larger audience than just ourselves and our experience. The reader wants to take away something from themselves and what you've written. In those golden gems of truth, which resonate with the reader, you make your writing more powerful. Thank you. And now I'll pass it on to Veena.
Thank you, Cindy. Good afternoon, friends, and thank you all for joining us. I'm Veena Rao, a Georgia Author of the Year 2021 finalist for my debut novel, Purple Lotus. Purple Lotus is the story of Tara, an Indian immigrant woman in the American South who is trapped in an abusive marriage, but feels powerless in the face of pressure from her patriarchal community to make peace with her destiny. So the Purple Lotus, the picture that you see on your right, it is a symbol of self-awakening in several Eastern cultures. And it is also a symbol of growth in the face of adversity. So like the lotus, Tara gradually builds the courage to break free, to gently rebuild her life, and she learns to honor her own worth. And eventually she realizes that her sanctuary is a place inside her where she feels safe and empowered. Purple Lotus is a feminist novel, but in several ways, it breaks stereotypes of what defines strong. Well, it has a strong heroine, but it breaks stereotypes and redefines what strong is. My Tara is quiet, introverted, and soft-spoken. And even when she displays extraordinary strength of character, she does not do anything overtly dramatic. So as the author, it was a challenge to flesh out her character arc through the twists and turns of the plot. Next slide, please, Liz. Thank you. So what is a character arc? Change is a universal truth. We all change over time, right? In fiction, the internal journey of the character is her character arc. A character arc can be positive or negative. In Purple Lotus, Tara has a positive arc. So at the beginning of the book, she comes across as vulnerable, fearful. She carries baggage from her past. But as the story moves forward and she faces the central conflict, her thinking changes, her attitudes change, and the way she responds to adversity changes. So there is positive growth, but as in life, her growth is threatened by a new variant of the central conflict. So what is central conflict? Your story will need an antagonist and or forces that work against the protagonist. A central conflict can be complex and it can take on many forms. In Purple Lotus, it is an abusive marriage. It is pressure from her Tara's patriarchal community to make peace with her destiny. It is Tara's own ingrained fears and a deep sense of shame and lack of self-worth. So as you can see, these conflicts are aligned with the major themes of the book, which is abuse, confronting patriarchy and tradition, and of course, a journey toward finding her sanctuary. There are several types of conflicts that authors deploy. I primarily use two types of conflicts to depict the growth of my protagonist and her journey. Can we go to the next slide, please? I'm sorry. I think we may have to go back. Yes, I see it there now. Okay, so the two primary types of conflicts that I deployed are internal versus external conflict. Most central conflicts are a blend of both inner conflict and outer friction. An external battle will inevitably give rise to internal conflicts, and overcoming both lead to change. And character versus society or community. Tara comes from a patriarchal community where the burden is on the woman to try harder to make her marriage work, to remain quiet, to make peace with her destiny. Divorce and remarriage are frowned upon, and these belief systems are in direct conflict with Tara's desire to find peace and love and joy. So these conflicts create several hurdles that the protagonist must face before she reaches her goal. And the change in your character has to be subtle, nuanced, gradual, but deep. It has to be authentic to the character you're writing about. You can drive a character's growth, internal growth, using dialogue and action, but you can also drive it forward using emotions. Tell your reader what your character is feeling. So I'll be reading two brief excerpts that show Tara's growth. They are both scenes where Tara is leaving home. In the first excerpt, her husband forces her out, and in the second, she leaves of her own accord. In both scenes, you will notice the interweaving of dialogue, action, and emotions. So this is the excerpt one. Sanjay strode to the front door with purpose, walking past Tara, who lay in a heap on the floor, and opened the door with a jerk. Leave. Sanjay, please, I have nowhere to go. I said out, woman. If you stay, there's no telling when I might be tempted to kill you. Tara picked herself up from the floor. She walked up to the door slowly, hoping he'd mellow, change his mind. He didn't. Take your purse with you, he said. Tara walked to her closet, found her bag, and walked to the front door again. For a second, she had contemplated locking herself in the bedroom, but she didn't trust her instincts. Her mind was too frozen to execute a plan. She pleaded again. This time, he grabbed her sore arm and pushed her out the door. She shuddered when he slammed it shut in her face. She sat on the top step of the stairwell a long time, hoping Sanjay would open the door, but knowing she'd be too afraid to go back in there if he did. She tried to focus on what to do next. Finally, it was time for the yellow and black school buses to drop off the elementary school kids back home. When the parents who walked down the stairs to receive their children gave her questioning looks, she pulled herself up and got out of the way. Such an ordinary day for so much drama, for her flimsy semblance of a life to collapse. The sun bore down on her, scorching her sore face. Her head throbbed and her limbs ached. She didn't know what hurt more, the beatings or his insults. She let her feet lead her. Her mind was still too much in shock to think of recourse. And now let's move on to excerpt 2. And this comes much later in the book, and you will see Tara's growth, internal growth. Tara rushed back in as suddenly as she had rushed out to the garden and stopped a foot away from his recliner, hands balled into fists, nails digging into her palms. "It was a mistake, Sanjay," she said. Her voice was quavering from all that was churning inside of her. "How I wish I had never come back." She watched his mouth harden into a thin line, heard the sharp intake of his breath. And what follows now is a graphic scene, so I'm going to skip it. It's a scene that shows, depicts abuse, so I'm going to skip that part. It was still dark when she emerged from upstairs into the family room, dressed in a bright yellow blouse and blue jeans, a small suitcase in her hand. He had dozed off on the recliner, a half-empty glass of vodka on the side table. He woke up with a start when she called out his name. His face darkened as recent events of the night flooded his mind. She hesitated, but only for a moment, before she embarked on her short leap of faith to the garage door. There, she turned around to face him one final time. His eyes had been on her back, but he quickly looked away. Her voice was calm when she said, "I'm not worthless to me, Sanjay." She shut the door behind her, not waiting to see his reaction. "I'm not worthless to me, Sanjay" is a short sentence in keeping with Tara's personality, but it is powerful enough that it shows her newfound sense of freedom, courage, and self-worth. So Tara reaching the goal, sanctuary as the final goal. Does Tara finally reach her sanctuary, her final goal? The place inside her where she has overcome her internal conflict? Does she find the courage to walk out of her marriage? Does she find love again? Does she work up the courage to confront her patriarchal community? And most important of all, does she succeed at uprooting her internal fears? These are the answers that are revealed gradually in the second half of the book. So in the first half, you raise the stakes and keep the reader turning pages until they find out what happens in the end. And as the author, that is one of your primary goals. Thank you. And now it gives me great pleasure to introduce our next panelist, Judith Teitelman, author of Guest House for Ganesha, which happens to be one of my favorite books on magic realism.
Oh,
Take it away, Judith.
very kind of you. Thank you, Veena. So as Veena said, I'm Judith Teitelman, author of Guest House for Ganesha, a tale of love, loss, and spirit reclaimed. This is my debut novel, and I'm really delighted to have the opportunity to share an overview of its journey and process with you. I have to start out honestly and say that I really am yet another accidental novelist. While I've always been a writer and I have a lifetime of papers and reports and proposals and essays and articles that I've authored, many of which have been published in a wide various variety of professional journals, I never had the desire to write creatively. However, as I'm sure you've all experienced, life often takes us in directions we don't plan or can even imagine. That's yet another universal truth. And essentially, that's what happened to me. I was almost literally dragged into a friend's new writers group. And within a couple months of attending every Saturday, I discovered that Guest House for Ganesha had been percolating within me for a very long time. And my novel, although fiction, was inspired by a real life event that informed my protagonist Esther's search for elsewhere. My novel's tagline essentially sums it up. left at the altar, spurned. What does that do to a young woman's heart? And why would a Hindu god care? The significant spark that conceived the gist of this story was finding out at the family lunch following my maternal grandmother's funeral that she had been abandoned at the altar by her beloved when she was 17 years old. Now, I had only known my grandmother as a mean-spirited, bordering on nasty woman, and trying to be understanding, I had attributed that her experiences during World War II, losing most of her family, having to leave 2 daughters, lose her husband and home, struggle to survive, etc., had hardened her irreparably. But no, it had been love, or more precisely, lost love, devastated love, abandoned love, something most of us experience at one time or another. Call that a universal reality. And the situation had made her callous, unyielding, relentless, and self-absorbed the rest of her life. And this experience informed all of her actions, yet also, and most importantly, it made her a survivor. So I was inspired to take this kernel and explore the concept in depth, and thus Guest House for Ganesha came into being. So the question is, how does one convey universal truths in writing? In my case, I chose the literary genre of magical realism. I'm a long-time enthusiast of magical realism. Frankly, I consider it the true reality. I believe there are layers of existence and experience around us at all times, those we see, those we don't, and those we could see if we made the effort. And I believe these distinct but interwoven realities exist concurrently. So in regard to moving my story forward and communicating these universal truths, I was fortunate in that I have a narrator who isn't just omniscient with infinite awareness, understanding, and insight, but a Hindu god who only speaks in universal truths. Liz, second slide, please. So I chose a Hindu god as my narrator because of my lifelong interest in Eastern philosophies, and determining it would be Ganesha was evident for me, as I've always been drawn to and inspired by his wisdom, warmth, and generosity of spirit. And I felt it important to have his world perspective, voice of reason and clarity, and also very importantly, humor throughout the novel. Also, one of the delights and gifts of Ganesha as narrator is that he could explain any and all unusual occurrences. Throughout my novel, my protagonist Esther is in search of sanctuary, although she is not consciously aware of this. She simply knows she has to leave. First, from her birthplace and family, because the wound she experienced was too deep and untenable for her to remain. And then during the war, she had to keep moving to survive. She is fortunate that early on, she had a glimpse, a taste of her ultimate destination. And throughout her journey, she is unwavering in her quest. She doesn't understand it, but Esther cannot deny that the commanding pull of Ganesha is leading her to India. And to give you a taste of this journey, I want to share just a very brief excerpt. It's the opening of chapter 13, which is the morning after Kristallnacht. In the morning, as she surveyed the damage before her, Esther's composure stood in stark contrast to the frenzy and despair of those in the neighborhood. She moved slowly up Kemagasa, balancing each step on the glass mounds that blanketed the street. Every shop window was shattered. Half the interiors had been burned. The air was thick with ash. Screeches echoed between the buildings, still in pain. Produce, staples, supplies, equipment, and clothing were strewn all over. She watched some neighbors cull through the ruins in search of anything salvageable. Others swept their brooms, no match for the mountains of rubble surrounding them. Esther spoke not a word. Clear-headedness, decisive action, and forward motion were now her trinity. She did not bother to conspire with Abraham. She knew full well he would hold her back, resist her efforts. These past few years, he had given no credence to her observations, to her warnings. Even now, after last night's calamity, with head shaking, he only said, "These crazy rules, this insane government, it can't continue. This is a passing craze, worse than others maybe, but this too shall pass." And he laughed, as though all that was taking place, all that had taken place, was merely some type of prank or a joke. Destroyed businesses, broken windows, smoke thick in the air, hysteria all around, and worse, just a joke. Nothing seemed to upend Abraham's buoyancy. He did calm the children, who were in a constant state of distress, and he distracted them. This was the most important benefit. He must keep them out of my way, she thought. It's time to leave, and I must plan for all of us. This situation is impossible. It will only get worse, like some incendiary device on verge of erupting. Of this I am confident. The fragile seams of existence, my life, are rapidly unthreading. I must figure out a fail-safe departure, and soon. I can't be bothered by the children's whining or Abraham's foolishness. But depart to where? As she gnawed on the inside of her right cheek, Esther ruminated. Is there somewhere safe, a sanctuary where such madness does not dwell, where people, all people, are free to live their lives, to simply go about daily activities and responsibilities and interests without risk that all could be taken away at a whim? No notice, no warning. Could such a place possibly exist? And I'll leave you with that. And it's my pleasure to introduce Annika Rana, author of Wild Boar in the Cane Field.
So thank you so much. Following these three great stories, you've probably all realized, all of you watching, that The Fly is my kind of focus of inspiration for Sanctuary. And my novel, Wild Boar in the Cane Field, is about a young woman. Again, similar to Veena's, mine is also Tara, a young, strong woman. And she, when we see her, she thinks back to the time as a baby when she was found covered in flies, and the two women who took her in. And so how does someone who has gone through so much trauma, how do they find sanctuary? And so, like, this organization that we realize, women bring strength to other women. And that's what she finds as well. The women around her are the people who bring her strength and bring her to terms. But along the way, we also realize this was something that I feel strongly about as a human being, as well as a writer, that sometimes to find peace within, we have to go outside of ourselves. And what better way to go outside of ourselves than to go into other living beings? And so that is why, as I was researching, this is also similar to Judith's story. My story has magic realism, and I wanted to the natural world, nature, flowers, plants, animals, the buffalo, the flies, everything to be part, and of course the wild boar, to be very much a part of my story. And so I did a lot of research about flies in particular, because central to my story is a shrine of Sai Makhiyanwala, which means the shrine of the keeper of the flies. And so you look outside the world, and then you empathize with the outside world. And that is one way that my characters can find peace. So Liz, can you take us to the next slide? So the first thing I needed to do was give us a kind of a strategy for my, this traumatized main character to understand the world around her and to find peace. And how am I going to do this? I'm going to look at all the different animals around her. And one, of course, the insect that is constantly around her is a fly. And so what are the characteristics of a fly that make me want to connect my character to, or not just my main character, but all the other characters, to be aware of this really insignificant insect It's just the way this insect lives. It tastes with its feet. It walks upside down. It has a 360-degree field view. And it also has a very short life, but there's a constant rebirth. And so similar to the themes that you've listened to with our other writers, this idea of being at peace or finding peace, and finding peace wherever, or finding sanctuary wherever it is available. So I took the fly. I made sure the fly was a character within within the story of Tara. And so what I'd like to demonstrate for you now is a piece from the story, a section from the story where you see Tara. She is expecting her first baby. She has been taken to the midwife who has 2 little children of her own. And the person who's taken her is Amma Bhaga, who is one of the 2 women who have taken her under her wing. She is also now her mother-in-law. And Amma Bhaga has taken Tara to the midwife and is convincing the midwife to show her the flower of Jericho, which is also called the flower of Mary. And it's a flower that gives, traditionally in South Asia, as well as in Middle Eastern countries, it's supposed to, the water of this flower is supposed to have medicinal properties, but also just the viewing of this flower is supposed to give peace to the mother who is about to give birth. So in this scene, Tara is expecting her baby. She's visiting the midwife who has 2 children. Tara is here with her adoptive mother. And we begin the scene with the midwife's 4-year-old daughter who's just been arguing with her elder brother who's a year older than her. And she's a precocious little girl. So let's begin. Are you going to show her the flower magic? Her daughter smiled. This little girl knew how to win her mother back. The midwife stroked her daughter's hair and smiled too. Go get me the earthen bowl and fill it with water at the pump. The little girl rushed out and her brother followed her. He seemed to have forgotten his original anger and wanted to join in on the fun of the magical flower. This interaction between a mother and her children was so different from what I had experienced or seen with Bhaga or Jannat, but it pleased me. I would do the same with my child. I would admonish it first, and then I would hug him and make him laugh, like the 2 laughing at the hand pump outside. I could see the children at play from where I lay. The little boy helped his mother, and she stood close to the stream, helped his sister, and she stood close to the stream, barely able to hold the bowl as water splashed everywhere. Her brother, noticing it was too heavy for his sister to carry, took the bowl from her hands and brought it to the doorstep. He stood there knowing not to cross into the room where I lay on the charpai, and his mother took the bowl from him. She smiled. She placed the shriveled plant into the bowl. Nothing happened. The midwife sensed my impatience. It takes time. Keep looking at the plant. I'm not sure how long it took, but I could hear Bhagan's heavy breathing in the background as each bud of the flower unfurled, spreading the twig into a fully bloomed plant. I might even have dozed off for a while, but I was awoken by the midwife explaining what had happened. You see, the flower will call to your body to open up, to release the new life. The pain will reduce and become a sweet pleasure when you see your baby for the first time. She touched my stomach again and announced, you see, even your baby has relaxed as you watch that flower bloom. Was it possible, I wondered? I had seen a buffalo give birth. One had nearly died because its baby got stuck, but I knew I was strong enough to bear that pain, and I trusted this midwife. She knew what she was doing. She had cared for so many other women through childbirth, even her own beautiful children. The midwife was now distracted by a fly that had just entered the room and landed on the rim of the bowl. The weather gets slightly cooler and these darn flies reappear, she complained. Bring me the fly swatter, she told her daughter, who now wanted to please her mother, so she ran out to get it, causing a commotion, and the fly disappeared through the window. And by the end of the story, these flies that we see throughout Tara's story will tell us what happened to her, why her mother deserted her, and will help us understand life. So thank you so much for listening to us all. And I would like to now, Liz, could you move us to the last slide? And this is where Judith and I are going to try and encourage you to share with us what you wrote in the opening.
Who would like to share? I mean, who selected an image that really compelled you? We'd love to hear from one of you.
Judith, it's Len. I'm happy to share because I know most of these people and I have a feeling they'll share if somebody else will. So.
Okay, go for it.
You want me to just read what I wrote?
Yes, please. What
Okay.
image first, if you can tell us which image
Sure,
spoke to you?
Sure. The tree. Okay. So trees have been a place of sanctuary for me for as long as I can remember. As a child, I loved to hear the wind in the trees, the branches murmuring what felt like quiet reassurances. As soon as I was big enough, I found sanctuary in the pecan tree in my backyard. I climbed up into its branches to escape my 4 older siblings and my little brother. Each branch became a different room in my playhouse, and I would climb from one to the other to rest, my living room, or nap, my bedroom, or cook, my kitchen. I loved the safety I found in that pecan tree and always felt a sense of serenity. Yes, trees still remain my place of sanctuary.
Oh, that's very beautiful. Thank you. And I didn't say in my portion that the tree came from my book, and I didn't want to reveal too much because to some extent it's a destination. So I really loved what you wrote, Lynn. Thank you.
Thank you. So what I would suggest is anyone who wants to read, if you can, I'm looking at your names, and I think if you will raise your hand, then I can let you talk. Okay.
So Gretchen is saying she needs
Yeah,
to be
Gretchen.
unmuted.
Yeah.
All
We're
right.
both saying the same thing.
All
She
right.
needed to be unmuted.
Sorry. Here is Sean. Sean, I'm going to allow you to talk now, okay? There you go. You need to unmute, Sean.
Okay, unmute. Okay. All right. Well, good evening, everybody. I also chose the tree, Len and Judith. I spent a lot of time outdoors in and around trees growing up, forts in the piney woods, climbing and up and out on limbs. As an adult now, I revere trees on account of the great amount of time it takes to grow them. We had a severe 6-day freeze here in Texas, and sorry, my writing wasn't. Oh, and it was like losing more family to see the trees that didn't make it. We're still hoping that some will survive, and many palms amazingly set out their little palms in the dirt near their base. That's it.
Thank you.
Mhm.
It seems as though Gretchen wants to read.
Yes, I'll go ahead and allow Gretchen. I'm going to allow you to talk, and you need to unmute.
Got
And
it.
everybody, come on, everybody, put those hands up.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
So I didn't write anything as beautiful as the 2 other persons. First of all, I just wanted to congratulate you 4 sisters of mine at She Writes Press for your publication and success of each of your books. They're awesome. But I was drawn, it was kind of a split for me between the lotus flower and the tree. And I think the lotus flower what I wrote down or what I jotted down was that, it reminds me of a quiet place. It's beautiful. I feel peaceful in looking at the image. It seems to me very calming. And I've also seen them all over the world in so many different places, in crummy places and in gorgeous places. And so I think there is something universal about them. But on the tree, on the other hand, to me symbolizes resilience, safety, sort of power in a way. And maybe that's because of the resilience. Also a place to sit that's kind of out of the sun and so protects us. So for me, it was kind of hard to pick between those two. But I also just want to say that the fly is very fascinating to me. And I would not have picked it. So that's for sure. But I'm really intrigued by Anika and sort of what you did with it. So thank you very much for that. And Cindy already knows what I think of how she did. Thank you very much, though, for offering this.
Thank you so much for your kind words. And also definitely an individual can have one or two or even more sanctuaries that one leads to. So that is quite lovely. Rebecca said that she would like to read, but she can't find her unmute button, which actually Len is in control of that, Rebecca.
Let's see if I can unmute you, Rebecca. I'm gonna allow to talk. Can you hear, Rebecca? I mean, can you say something?
Okay, can you hear me?
Oh, Pat,
Yes.
great, okay.
Okay, yeah, it's a different screen that came up for me, so there was no unmute button. I also wrote about the tree. The canopy invites me, and its brilliant green sparkles as the sunbeams find a place to land. I feel safe, grounded, aware, and clear-minded. Nature writes notes to me on the bark of trees and the swaying branches. The texture of its bark compels me to rest my hand upon it. My fingers find the deep cracks that lead me to my center. The muskiness, chloroform, and sunlight rattles my senses, reminding me that I am home.
So beautiful, really lovely. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the inspiration.
I appreciate everybody sharing, but let's take it from maybe a little bit different angle. Who wrote something that surprised them? Who picked an image that they ordinarily wouldn't have picked and was surprised by it and surprised by what you wrote? And who would like to share that? Anyone?
Jeannie.
Great.
Okay, here you go, Jeannie. You should be able to talk now. Let's see if you can. Jeannie, are you there? Well, let's wait on Jeannie for a minute. Just 1 second. Let me see if let me make sure I'm not doing something wrong. No, Jeannie should be able to talk. Jeannie, do you turn up your volume if you're there? All right, let me go to Marion for a minute and then we'll check back with Jeannie in 1 second. Let's see. Marion, you should be allowed to talk now. Can you say hello? Oh, Marion, you have to unmute.
I can't see myself or anyone else. I haven't been able to at all the whole time. Is that correct?
That's okay. We can hear you.
Okay, so that's all. I'm not supposed to be able to see anyone.
No, you are supposed to be able to see, but we probably can't fix that right now.
Oh, okay. I didn't write a story. Haven't been doing these enough to feel confident sharing. But what I did notice was that I'm a nature lover, but I don't necessarily feel sanctuary in nature. My desire is to feel sanctuary, I guess, in my home. It's very important to me, and I don't feel it that there. And so I have, well, I picked the tree because I can imagine myself sitting at the base of the tree trunk. When we take walks, I look at the things around me, but I'm more interested in two things. I'm interested in the houses that people live in, the colors that everybody's been painting their homes, and they're all different colors. People have been putting additions to make their houses bigger. Home must be a very important topic right now, because I'm seeing these homes changing, and also, and the flowers, the things that go with them. But the tree, what I'm also noticing is my interest in the trunks of the trees. People look at the leaves, but I don't. I look at the trunks. There's a story in every tree, and one day I plan to go and make and photograph all the pieces of the tree, the squirrelier, the uglier, the sometimes the more diseased a trunk can be, the more interesting it is to me. And so that was the closest I could get in terms of the picture. And then I began to think about where I do feel my sanctuary in my home, and where I do feel it is when I'm, well, where I feel sanctuary is when I'm sitting across from another woman and we're talking. I feel I wrote things down that are important that I want to remind myself about, and also bring up to my story circle group. What is sanctuary? Looking at other women who are feeling some of the things that I'm feeling at the same time is a kind of sanctuary. So those are the things that a lot of things have come up for me, but I didn't write it down. I can only talk about it. So, but that's all I'll say. I'll stop talking now.
That was great. Thank you so much. And definitely over these last 14, 15 months of the pandemic, I think for so many people, home, everybody's home has very much been our sanctuary, because we've likely spent more time inside at our home than we typically would. So I appreciate that. Thanks so much. And
Let's try Jeannie one more time, but Jeannie, I do need to ask you to unmute. Can you do that? There you go. You should be able to talk now. Well, are you talking, Jeannie? Because you are talking as permitted on my thing here. All right. I think we're having some technical problems with Jeannie.
Jeannie, do you want to type into the chat? Oh, you just said you're unmuted. So that's so interesting.
Yeah, she is unmuted. Turn your volume up just a little, Jeannie. Let's see if that makes a difference. And try again. Yeah, I think we're having some technical problems. She says volume is way up, and yes, I'm unmuted. And she is unmuted. I can see that. Talking is permitted. So
technology is mercurial, is what I say.
True. This is
even
true.
after spending so much time, I'm so sorry we can't hear you. Is there anyone else who would like to share? Anyone who one of these images who particularly spoke?
Lucy and Catherine and Cherry have all raised their hands now.
Okay.
So let
Wonderful.
me,
So Lynn,
let-
pick them one at a time.
all right, well, Lucy's hand just went back down, I think. But Catherine, let me allow you to talk. Okay, hey, but unmute, Catherine.
Hello.
There you are.
Thank you everyone so much for this presentation. All of those photographs evoked a lot of emotion in me, you know, everything from sort of a state of wonder to delight, curiosity, but they didn't really speak to me in terms of sanctuary. And so I found myself asking like, well, why not? Or what is? And all the images that came to mind were active images, like the ocean moving, snow falling, the landscape muted in fog. So they were the images from the natural world, but they were full of movement rather than like a static image. And but it was a great journey. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Well, I think of our 4 images, the fly is the one that is most active. But yeah, thank you. And
now we have Cherry. Cherry, are you ready? Let me, hold on. Sorry, now I'm behind. Here we go. Allow to talk. There you go, Cherry. Oh, but you have to unmute. You have to unmute on your end. There you go. Go ahead.
Yes, I found it difficult I was curious about all the images, but I found that I wanted to pull out from the specificity of it and see what else was around. And I in part, I grew up in Texas. For the last 31 years, I've lived in New Mexico, and I find that space is has become very important to me. And so I wanted, it's like the tree. I'm like, well, but what's all that in the background? That looks distracting. I want, a tree. I certainly love trees, even though I have none around my desert home. But like I said, I think that space is important to me in terms of sanctuary. And that is part of what makes my home a sanctuary, is because I have space around it. My neighbors are not close. And I have views that stretch all the way. I'm 60 miles north of El Paso. I have views that stretch all the way to Mexico. And so for me, having lived here for 23 years, sanctuary is a place and a space, where you can let down defenses and experience the being, just the being, and the peace of not being messed with, I guess, and some things of that sort. I've enjoyed the session, but like I said, that was interesting to me to learn to verbalize for myself how important space is to me. So thank you.
thank you. I especially love that our definitions and our sanctuary journeys sparked realizations and clarity with others. That's really lovely to hear. Thank you.
And
Glenn,
we
is there anyone else who wants to
have
share?
Lucy. Lucy is ready. And Lucy, I'm going to allow you to talk, but you do need to unmute.
Okay, and then Jeannie said that she thinks she solved the audio problem. So
Yay. Okay, after Lucy, we'll go back to Jeannie. Very good.
thank you.
Can you hear me? Can you
Yes.
hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. This is so weird because I wrote about the tree and then I started looking at the fly. And it occurred to me that the fly was so beautiful, and that is the only way he can gain sanctuary for himself, is if people realize how beautiful he is. Because if he's just buzzing around your head and you don't really look at him and see how beautiful he is, you're going to pull out the fly swatter. And I've developed a really interesting relationship with flies over the last few years. We get them here in West Texas a lot. And when I see one, I tell him, hang on, I'm going to get you outside. And I have these peanut butter jars all over the house. And I come over and just lower it very carefully over the top of him. And they never move. They let me put them in the peanut butter jar. And then I take them outside. I call my peanut butter jars Freedom Express. And I take them outside and let them outside. And it's because I know how beautiful they are. That's all. I feel kind of silly about that, but that's what I came up with.
Please don't feel silly at all. That was lovely. And the fly does look like a piece of jewelry.
Yes.
A beautiful brooch and that glows. So,
even the scene you created just now with the peanut butter jar
Yeah.
and the saving of them, that was such a magical moment. And it's interesting how when your reader, your listener can see what you're seeing and is making me feel the way you feel, I think that's the beauty of being able to not only identify your own sanctuary, but pull other people into that same space. So thank you so much for sharing that thought.
Thank you.
Not to mention Freedom Express. I love that.
yeah, absolutely. So now hopefully Jeannie.
Here we go, Jeannie. I'm going to allow you to talk. Let's see. There you go.
I'm almost afraid to unmute. Can you hear
Now
me?
you're there.
Yes.
Wonderful.
Oh, this is going to be terrible. I killed 2 flies this morning. I mean, this is truth telling. And now that I look at that beautiful fly, I'm thinking that was a very unkind thing. I need a peanut butter jar here in the house somewhere. I'll work on that, I promise. So just so you'll know, all that I was telling you earlier was profound, but it was going to a speaker in my bedroom. And so I have no idea the brilliance that I sent to you, but we'll just hold that, okay? I just can't tell you how impressed I am with each of your stories and your writing, and how I was drawn in to each one of them. In answer to the question about sanctuary, I would generally have chosen the tree, but did not. I went to the lotus only because it reminded me of being on Whidbey Island off the coast of Seattle, which is probably a strange place to think about the lotus there, but it's damp, it's comforting, it's beautiful. I love nature and the effect that being in such a climate has on me, that I feel so held. So I did choose the lotus, and all I did was write down the words that was earthy and peaceful and restful and layered and not too sunny. So when I heard Judith's story, I thought, well, that's different from my lotus. So it just points out that it's true that we all find sanctuary, and even something that may be similar, but we find sanctuary that is within us. The picture may be the same, but how we take it in, how we absorb it is different. And I'm just very pleased that I signed up tonight, and glad you can't see me and watch me as I ate my dinner. But this has been a very lovely evening. So thanks to all of you.
Thank you. I'm glad it finally worked. Lynn, is there anyone else waiting to share?
No, I'm not seeing any other hands up. Everybody, yes, we are complete.
So before we transition to any questions you all might have for any of us, I just want to thank you profusely for that exercise and taking it seriously and really reflecting on what sanctuary means to you, whether one of these images sparked you or something else from inside. That was such a true delight to hear. So thank you. And now we'll just open it up if you have any questions for any of us about anything.
Or if you have anything to share with us as well, as we would love to take in your perspective. So questions or comments.
Good
I
point.
have a question, and anybody that wants to ask a question, just put your hand up, okay? When you began your novels and your memoir, did you know that you were going to be writing about sanctuary, or was it something that you discovered as you wrote?
I can start, and I'll say I actually wrote my ending before I knew I had a novel. It was in that Saturday class that I mentioned, and for quite a few weeks, I didn't know what I was writing or why I was even there. But I would write, I'm not going to do a spoiler for those of you who haven't read it, but I wrote about something in particular, and the tree was included in that. And yes, so I knew that it was about sanctuary, but I didn't know all the elements and components before. Cindy?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. I kind of knew that there was an element of sanctuary in my story because I still look at the temple, the all women's temple where I go in Thailand, where my teacher is abbess, as a sanctuary because I feel like I'm home every time I come there. But what I learned, and partly as a result of doing this webinar, this panel, and we've all articulated is that the internal growth and the transformation, the spiritual transformation, kind of came in my journey through finding that I awakened the sanctuary within myself, the deeper awareness and the becoming. So I didn't know about that aspect of sanctuary. And I just want to take a minute, since I'm speaking, to say how wonderful it is to hear everyone's take on sanctuary and your experiences, because it is, I think, in speaking with one another that we learn and we grow. So thank you.
Anika or Vina, do you have a comment about that? Did you know it was sanctuary when you started?
Vina, you're muted.
Oh, you have to unmute, yeah.
Yes. Well, people ask me why I picked the title for this book, my book. It's The Purple Lotus. A lotus stands for growth in the face of adversity. So I guess I knew what the theme of the book would be. But when I started to write the book, all I had was the title. I did not have a story. So I did not know that I would be writing about Tara's finding sanctuary. But also I've got to add that like my protagonist, Tara, I come from a patriarchal culture. And I have experienced firsthand what patriarchy can do, not just to your interpersonal relationships, but also just the way you view yourself. And so it was very important for me to write about a woman who feels troubled, broken, who is conditioned to believe she is weak and like she has no control over her life, because at some point I was this woman. So, growing up, I immigrated from India 20 years ago, 2 decades ago. And I grew up in a small town called Mangalore in the south of India. And growing up, we moved so often that even my hometown did not really feel like home. And then, of course, we moved halfway across the world to Atlanta. That's where I live now. And so I had to think about what sanctuary means to an immigrant like me, who does not feel rooted to a place. And that's when I came up with this, I had to also explore, excuse me. Yeah, I also wanted to explore what, abuse would do to a woman who already feels rootless. She's so far away from home. She feels, deep-rooted fears, and she feels vulnerable. She has deep-rooted fears of abandonment because she was abandoned as a child. What would her sanctuary be? Is it just a place, or is it something else? Is it something deeper? And then that's when, it took a lot of drafts. It took me 10 years to write the final version of Purple Lotus, and several draft after draft. And I struggled through the second half. I struggled for 10 years to get to the point where I could actually find a publisher. And so, I tried out different storylines, but the one that really I thought was good enough was where, Tara thinks of her sanctuary as not just a place, but a place inside her where she feels empowered. But of course, that did not come to me initially. It took several years of writing and rewriting because I also had to teach myself to write.
Thank you. Thank you. Anika, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I am kind of a constant seeker of sanctuary, whether I write about it or not. So this has kind of been my life goal, is to find peace and sanctuary. And I imagine everything that I will write, whether it was about education or whether it's about, because that's where I've spent most of my professional life. And like Veena, I also grew up in South Asia. I grew up in Pakistan. What I realized what I wanted to do with my story is I wanted to celebrate the strength of people who are in an adverse situation or an environment where they are powerless. But I wanted to show that the human spirit prevails. And so, again, similar to Veena, there's a patriarchy there. There's, a level of maybe religiosity or conservativeness or feudalism and class system, all of these things that make life so, so difficult. And then the human spirit prevails. And that was what I wanted to, and it doesn't prevail in isolation. It prevails in community, whether it's the community of the people around or whether it's the, nature around it. It has this capacity to find what it needs. So that was what my goal was.
Okay, thank you so much. I appreciate those very thoughtful answers. Gretchen does have a question, and then at that point, that could be our last question, I'm thinking, because our time is 7:21 here in Central Time. Okay.
I just want to say in the Q&A, Marion said her hand is raised.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, we'll get to, all right. Well, then we'll take two questions. All right. Gretchen, I'm going to allow you to talk. There you go. And
Thank you.
Ready. Yeah.
Yeah, so my question to you is, in your preparation for this presentation webinar, which has been great, did you think of your own writing practice as sanctuary? Or do you find sanctuary in writing itself?
Yes, the quick answer is yes, very much so. Every time I write something, it gives me peace and pleasure and power. Mm-hmm. And I seek, and I am lucky that now I have taken it on full time.
Thanks.
Sorry.
Go ahead, Cindy.
I would also say in the process, I had never thought of it, Gretchen, but I like what you're suggesting. I do feel that in writing, I find a centeredness and a grounded, and I can usually strip away layers that I wouldn't normally see.
Yeah.
So that's a very exciting process. And in writing a memoir, just as an example, which you've also done beautifully, Poetic License, we have a chance to perhaps heal an old wound that has besieged us for a long time. And I learned things in writing that I don't think I would have grasped any other way. So it was the sanctuary the process of revealing was in itself a sanctuary because I became more deeply rooted in myself.
Yeah, thanks. That's great.
Mhm.
Judith, were you going to add just something?
I was
Curious.
I think that's a very compelling question, Gretchen, and I could not have answered so readily as Annika, because perhaps ultimately the process does turn into, obviously it's very inward and such, but it's challenging. And
Right.
I'm very, very tough on myself.
Mhm.
Guest House Berganesha took 18 years to publication. So betwixt and between consulting and teaching and life and travel, etc., it was a long journey.
Right.
And it was a necessary journey, and it's something I'm immensely proud of. And ultimately, there is a peace within for having achieved this, which is a type of sanctuary. And I do love to write, but I can't say the journey is peaceful.
Right.
That.
Yeah, some days more than others.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But thank you.
Thank
That's
you.
very
Well, thank you.
compelling question.
Did everybody get to respond?
Dina.
Dina.
Okay.
I agree with Cindy and Anika. There's so much you learn about yourself, and you go deep within yourself. And I think I just, became a better person, more compassionate, gentler, kinder, because writing gives you this whole unique worldview that is not otherwise, readily available to you.
Thank you all for those answers.
Thank you, Gretchen.
Appreciate them.
Thank you.
Let me go to Marion now. Marion, you need to unmute. And as soon as you have, you may begin.
It's interesting, Judith, that you noticed that that I had a question, because it was to you. I'm so stuck on something I heard for the first time from you, and that's the term magical realism. And I just want to know a little bit more about it, because I think that when I was a teacher, I did a lot of that with my students because they were young and they loved getting into anything. I could tell them anything, pretend anything was real, and they would get into the story with me and we would act it out. But I didn't know it was a term until you said it. So tell me more about it.
Well, magical realism is a genre that first came out of South America. And Gabriel Garcia Marquez is considered the father of magic realism. 100 Years of Solitude, Love in the Time of Cholera. No doubt those are all books familiar to you. And it is not the most common of literary genres, but it's one that I particularly adore. Isabel Allende is a magical realist writer. Of course, my mind goes blanks now, but there are many. So that is the first time you've heard the term?
Yes, I thought I knew all the different genres, but and that would have been perfect when I was teaching. I would have loved to do more of that and to tell the kids about it. So
Gabriel Garcia Marquez is the father of magic realism.
Okay.
And he's one of my heroes, and Isabel Allende. It's, as I said in my presentation, to me, magic realism is the true realism, that there's what we see here, but over there's something else going on, and there are always layers, and most of us, most of the time, don't pay any attention, but we're not just in one sphere, I guess is the way of describing it.
Well, I'm going to have to read more about it.
Enjoy.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
It looks like we're pretty close to wrapping up. Do we agree, everybody? Yeah. Do you, now I know in the last slide, Liz, we have everybody's websites. Is that correct? There, oh, Q&A, there we go. There's everybody's website. And I will certainly encourage you. We have put in the chat box a direct link to Amazon for each one of these books. And we certainly hope that you'll take this opportunity to explore these wonderful places of sanctuary that everyone has. Our four, I better come back in here. Our four, hello, our four authors have shared with us. I have to tell you, I have found this to be one of the most fascinating and most wonderful of the websites, of the webinars that we have presented. So thank you. I just feel like you all brought such a different kind of perspective to the concept of sanctuary, and really opened my mind in terms of my own writing and in the book that I thought I had just finished until until this webinar, but that's okay. Anyway, so thank you, Anika and Vina and Cindy and Judith. I am so appreciative that you have come and shared this wisdom and your experience, and I'm going to look forward to reading your books.
Thank you. And
Thank
thank
you.
you
And
so
we
much for
encourage
inviting
everyone
us.
Sorry,
Thank
Judith. We encourage
Bye.
everyone to write your own story because there's depth and wisdom in each one of you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that is what Story Circle Network is all about. Women writing their own stories, whether they're small or they're a novel or a memoir. And they're all very, very important in terms of self-discovery, finding those places of sanctuary, and also connecting with other women and with the world, not just other women, but the power of this community and women to women is it is real. And I am so appreciative of it. So, and I can so relate, and I know Marion, and I know that she's telling the truth when she says that her sanctuary is when she's among other women. So thank you for sharing that, Marion. So I'm going to thank you all, and and now I want to encourage everybody who is here to consider attending our next webinar, which is also, now these are four She Writes authors. I am correct on that. Is that right? Everybody's a She Writes author. So next time, I believe we have 4 more She Writes authors. So we're having a great opportunity to get to know the She Writes community, which we are very happy to be included in. And that particular webinar is called Mapping Your Character's Journey to Self-Discovery. So it's really actually, in a very interesting way, an extension of what you guys have been talking about today. So it's just exactly kind of tongue and groove here, kind of the same kind of thing. And that will be on July 28th from 4 to 5:15. So look for our ads, and we hope that you will attend that as well. Again, be sure and explore these books. And I'm so appreciative that you all have shared with us. And at this point, we'll say goodbye.
Thank you.